Welcome to the Dream Novel channel. Before starting to listen to the fun in this clip, don't forget to like and comment, so that the admin will have the encouragement to continue making clips. Let's go listen. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 241, Maxime and the silver-haired girl Kyle, who had been studying the golden symbols on the ceiling, turned toward the voices and noticed two others in the hall, chatting comfortably. The one who had just spoken was Maxime, whom he recognized from the Order of Merlin ceremony at Hogwarts. Beside him sat a strikingly tall witch, though tall hardly seemed adequate. Even while seated, she was at least 2 or 3 meters in height, making Maxime, himself a tall man, look almost childlike by comparison. Kyle had only met one person of similar stature, Hagrid. This witch was about the same height but had a very different presence. Unlike Hagrid's rugged appearance, she had a striking, handsome face, with deep-set dark eyes, a sharp nose, and hair swept back into a neat, glossy bun at the nape of her neck. She wore a splendid peacock blue satin robe adorned with opulent opals around her neck and on her thick fingers, giving her an elegant, almost regal aura. As Kyle looked on, she handed 2 galleons to Maxime, though in her enormous hand, the coins looked no bigger than soybeans. "Fleur doesn't quite grasp the value of the philosopher's stone fragments," she said in a low, smooth voice. "And solving the clues is also a show of wisdom." Maxime chuckled without argument, pocketing the 2 galleons with a smug smile. "Don't mind her, child. Olymp means no harm," said a gentle voice beside Kyle. He turned to see an elderly man with a kind smile and flowing white hair. "In fact, we all know that your choice was the right one. After being used as a portkey, the magic within the fragment will completely dissipate, and it will eventually turn into nothing more than an ordinary stone." The elderly man's attire was quite unorthodox compared to the others. He wore a vibrant light blue floral shirt, bright orange beach shorts, and large brown sunglasses shaped like clam shells. The only thing missing was a water pistol. "Mr. Nicholas Flamel," Kyle said, quickly realizing who he was speaking to. "Oh, I'm glad you recognized me," Flamel replied with a warm smile, extending his hand. "Just call me Nicholas. Everyone does, it makes me feel so much younger." For a man over 600 years old, the difference between 20 and 200 must have seemed negligible. Kyle, a bit taken aback, nodded and shook his hand, feeling how frail Nicholas's grip was. It was like shaking hands with a piece of tofu. At that moment, the others approached. "Hello again, my boy." Maxime greeted him warmly. "Welcome to Paris. This is Nicholas's former residence. Allow me to introduce Madame Maxime, the headmistress of Beauxbatons Academy of Magic. She made a special trip from her private estate in the Pyrenees just to meet you." Kyle looked up as best he could to meet her gaze. "It's an honor to meet you, Madame Maxime." "Hello, my boy," she replied with an appraising look. "Have you ever thought about transferring to Beauxbatons?" Kyle was taken aback by her forthrightness, but after a moment, he shook his head politely. "Hogwarts suits me well, and all my friends are there." "What a pity," Madame Maxime mused, seemingly undeterred. "But they could transfer along with you if they wished." "Now, Olymp, that won't do," Maxime said disapprovingly. The boy clearly prefers Hogwarts. It was no small thing to attempt poaching Dumbledore's students, and Madame Maxime seemed to want not just Kyle but his friends as well. With his friendships and their talent, Hogwarts would feel the loss. Dumbledore might even rush to Paris overnight if he heard, and likely bring along Minerva McGonagall to help. Maxime, unfazed, continued, "It's ultimately his choice, Dugald." She looked back at Kyle. "What do you say, my dear? Would you consider transferring? I assure you that Beauxbatons has fine professors and wonderful students. You'd enjoy it." Kyle hesitated, trying to think of a polite way to refuse. Hogwarts, after all, had something unique, a basilisk, a legacy from Salazar Slytherin himself, one of the school's founders. Beauxbatons had no such legacy to compare. Why would he ever leave Hogwarts for a mere crystal astrology tower? Sorry, Kyle began, only to be interrupted. Don't be so quick to refuse, my boy. A sly glint sparkled in Madame Maxime's eyes. My offer stands until the moment you leave here. MacPhail suddenly looked exasperated, muttering, oh, blast it, how could I forget about the girl with the Vila bloodline? No wonder you brought her along. Madame Maxime merely smiled. Leaning close to Kyle, MacPhail whispered, my boy, did you bring any Baruffio's brain elixir or awakening potion? No, Kyle replied, shaking his head. The potion kit Director Sykes had given him contained a variety of basics, but not those potions. He rarely needed them anyway, so they hadn't crossed his mind. Oh, that's unfortunate. In that case, maybe we should, Dugald. Maxime interjected with a smile. You can't make decisions for him. And I'm sure even if Dumbledore were here, he wouldn't refuse such an offer. Well, he's not here. MacPhail shot back, glancing from Kyle to Maxime's smiling face and then back again. Scratching his head, he groaned, by Merlin's beard, I shouldn't have come today. Dugald, I have potion ingredients and a cauldron I can lend you, if you'd like, Nicholas offered with a grin. He had been quietly observing the entire scene, a glint of amusement in his eyes. MacPhail sighed, resigned. There's nothing else for it. I just hope we're not too late. Still muttering his regret, he turned to Kyle, his tone serious. Listen, kid. Until I return, you must stay alert. No matter what happens or what you see, keep your mind clear. It's crucial. With that, he hurried off toward a room at the back of the hall. Maxime made no attempt to stop him, as a young girl had just appeared in the center of the hall as if out of thin air. She wore the same peacock blue satin robes as Maxime, and her silver hair cascaded down her back like a waterfall. Her eyes, a striking azure, seemed even more enchanting than the ceiling itself, holding a charm that was almost impossible to ignore. Maxime's smile widened as she walked over to the girl, took her hand, and led her to Kyle. May I introduce Fleur Delacour, Beauxbatons's brightest student. MacPhail, watching from the doorway, groaned and covered his face with his hands, muttering, it's over. Albus, forgive me. Meanwhile, Nicholas had settled into the best spot to view the scene, a bucket of freshly popped popcorn in hand, clearly prepared for some entertainment. However, to everyone's surprise, Kyle showed no sign of being enchanted or dazed. Instead, he extended his hand politely and said, nice to meet you. You can call me Kyle. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 242, Kyle's Bad Habit. Kyle remained composed and respectful as he shook Fleur's hand lightly. Hello, Fleur Delacour, she greeted him with equal poise. Despite not knowing French, Kyle understood her words as though an invisible translator hovered in the room. Nearby, Nicholas sat beaming, munching on popcorn, while a house elf dressed in a race car driver's outfit stood beside him, holding a glass of white wine. I've heard of you, Fleur said, her gaze appraising. You saved over 50 people and became the youngest recipient of the Order of Merlin. A few days ago, the Order of Merlin's decision to award a level 2 medal to a 12-year-old had sparked a stir across the magical community, and Fleur was naturally aware of it. Beauxbatons had only 2 order recipients aside from the honorary Professor Nicholas Flamel. Headmistress Maxime held an Order of Merlin, 2nd class, and Professor Victor, the alchemy teacher, held an Order of Merlin, 3rd class. Now, a Hogwarts student younger than her and in the same year had achieved the same recognition as Madame Maxime. Curiosity about Kyle had been inevitable. Some at Beauxbatons, however, doubted the legitimacy of his accomplishment. When Fleur learned that Kyle would be visiting Nicholas Flamel in France, she had asked Madame Maxime to bring her along, and to her surprise, Maxime had quickly agreed, perhaps due to the connection as alumni, with Nicholas being a proud graduate of Beauxbatons himself. Yet after meeting Kyle, Fleur's first impression was surprisingly favorable. As a Quartervila, Fleur naturally emitted a subtle allure that often rendered those around her a bit clumsy upon first meeting her, even among her professors. But Kyle's gaze remained steady, unclouded and sharp, unaffected by her charm. "It's hard to believe you were able to face such a fearsome creature," Fleur remarked, genuinely curious. "I just got lucky," Kyle replied lightly. "Two professors were there with me, so I had backup. I just ran in without thinking." He smiled. "I bet if you'd been there, you'd have done the same." "Of course," Fleur said proudly, lifting her chin slightly. Students from Beauxbatons never lack the courage to face danger. Her voice carried a confident conviction, and it seemed as though her charm intensified in that moment. Her long, silver hair shone more brightly, as if illuminated from within, and the enchanted ceiling above appeared to dim in comparison. MacPhail, who had briefly relaxed, now looked tense again, clearly concerned about Kyle's reaction. But Kyle remained entirely unaffected. His mastery of occlumency not only shielded him from legilimency but also fortified his mind against most forms of enchantment. He had worked meticulously on this skill in preparation for dealing with Voldemort's Horcruxes, leaving no gaps in his mental defenses. Fleur's Vila charm was powerful, but it was no match for the rigorously practiced occlumency shielding Kyle's mind. Even if her full-blooded Vila grandmother were here, the outcome would likely be the same. Kyle felt a twinge of pity. As she watched Kyle and Fleur conversing pleasantly, Madame Maxime's smile slowly faded, only to reappear on MacPhail's face. "Well, Olympe, it seems your little plan hasn't gone quite as expected," he commented with a smirk. Maxime raised an eyebrow, her tone smooth. "What are you talking about, Dougald? They're getting along wonderfully, aren't they?" MacPhail chuckled oddly, choosing not to press her further. "And as for you, Dougald," Maxime said coolly, "weren't you off to brew Baruffio's brain elixir? What are you still doing here? Are you certain you even remember how to make such a complex potion?" Both the brain elixir and the awakening potion required intricate steps and precise timing. One misstep, and the whole potion would be ruined, an undertaking even veteran potion makers found challenging. "As I recall, you haven't touched a cauldron in over a decade," Maxime continued, her expression skeptical. 9 years. MacPhail corrected indignantly. "I was invited to the potions competition that time and personally awarded the winner's trophy." "Ah, yes, that time," Maxime said in an indifferent tone. "If I remember correctly, they mistook your scintillation solution for an invigoration draft and even sampled it, quite the spectacle." MacPhail's face flushed, and he retorted with forced confidence, "I only did that to lighten the mood. I was aware of the mix-up from the start, it was deliberate, it wasn't an admission of error." He mumbled on about the universality of potion-making, and the importance of keeping things lively. Nicholas, watching the banter, couldn't help but smile. Witnessing old friends squabble was one of his greatest pleasures, second only to attending the opera. He only wished Dumbledore were present to join in on the fun. Meanwhile, Kyle and Fleur continued their polite conversation, discussing the educational methods of their respective schools and exchanging tentative plans to work together for progress. Their topics remained focused on school life, as they didn't know each other well enough to dive into anything deeper. After a while, Fleur glanced at Kyle's hand, noticing a suitcase he was gripping. "I was meaning to ask, why did you suddenly pull out a suitcase?" It's just a habit," Kyle replied nervously, swiftly moving his hand behind his back. "Nothing to worry about, it's just an ordinary suitcase I use for carrying things." "A habit?" Fleur repeated, looking puzzled. Kyle's explanation seemed odd. Who carried a suitcase while chatting? She had certainly never encountered anyone at Beauxbatons with such a quirk. "Ah, it's just one of my little hobbies," he replied, growing more flustered. In reality, he had acquired a bit of a reflex at Hogwarts due to his extensive collection of magical creatures. The mention of Fleur's Vila heritage had caused him to reach for the suitcase instinctively. Fortunately, the real magical suitcase was with Dumbledore, and the one he held now was merely an ordinary case. If he had mistakenly used Newt's suitcase and accidentally slipped Fleur into it, well, leaving Paris in one piece would have been unlikely. To defuse the awkwardness, Kyle opened the suitcase and took out a handful of candies. "Here, these are for you," he said, offering them to Fleur. Fleur accepted them instinctively. "Candies? Well, I wasn't expecting you, so I didn't have time to prepare a proper welcome gift," Kyle explained with a smile. "But these are some of the most popular treats at Hogwarts, they're delicious." Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 243, a different Maxime. Fleur picked up a yellow candy and popped it into her mouth, her eyes lighting up instantly. "It's delicious." "Those are fizzing whiz-bees," Kyle explained with a smile. "One of Honeydook's bestsellers. If you like them, I'll send you some more after school starts." Fleur was about to nod, but a thought struck her, and her expression shifted to a slight frown. "Sorry, I didn't bring you a gift." She had come with a competitive mindset, so naturally, bringing a gift hadn't crossed her mind. She hadn't expected Kyle to be so relaxed, not only humble but also giving her a gift willingly and without the slightest hint of being enchanted. This left Fleur feeling a little embarrassed. "It's fine. You can make it up to me the next time we meet." Kyle waved it off with a smile, casually tucking the suitcase back into his bag. "All right, if we meet again, I'll definitely make up for this gift," Fleur promised with a nod. "And when school starts, I'll send you some special French sweets. You'll like them too." Maxime, who had been standing nearby, had seen and heard everything exchanged between the two of them. She nodded slightly, and the smile that had vanished earlier slowly reappeared on her face. As expected, he was still just a 12-year-old kid. While he'd resisted Fleur's particular charm, he still got a bit nervous in her presence. And now, she was even giving him gifts. Though she hadn't managed to lure him back to Beauxbatons right away, it was a promising start. Besides, it would be concerning if this Kyle boy hadn't reacted at all. The wizarding world was never short of talented young wizards, but it was rare to find one mature enough to match his talent. She had even considered setting up an age line or something similar to exclude Kyle, should the event actually proceed. But now, she felt there was no need to go to such lengths. Let things unfold naturally. Seeing that the conversation between Kyle and Fleur had wrapped up, Maxime paid no further attention to McPhail, who was still chattering beside her. She strode over with a deliberately stern expression. "I didn't realize that Dumbledore had already briefed you on that matter. Sharing strictly confidential information with a student, now that's something I've never seen before." "What?" Kyle blinked, looking puzzled. Maxime stared at him for a long moment, then suddenly laughed. "Not bad. You've got a good sense of discretion. Just remember, this matter remains strictly confidential, so it's best to keep it to yourself. If word gets out, it could all go to waste." Kyle looked even more confused. Maxime continued talking, almost as if to herself. "I suppose you guessed Fleur would be involved, which is why you mentioned seeing her again. Well, you were correct in thinking that. Fleur will indeed be there." Kyle's mouth dropped open. He really wanted to tell Maxime that he'd just been being polite. It was like saying, "I'll buy you dinner sometime," one of those phrases that hovers somewhere between sincerity and politeness. He had plenty of candy, it wasn't worth fussing over. But then Kyle began to realize what Maxime was hinting at. The Triwizard Tournament. It was supposed to be kept secret, and Fleur's participation was guaranteed, that had to be it. But wasn't the tournament set to start in 2 years? Why were they talking about it so early? Kyle mulled this over, but his expression remained completely unchanged. Maxime lowered her head, grumbling in frustration, "It's all Karkaroff's fault, that coward. We were so close to reaching an agreement, but the moment he heard Hogwarts was involved, he hid himself in fear. It's just a wandering soul, what's there to be afraid of? That Death Eater, Olymp." McPhail interjected sharply. "There are children here." "Sorry." Maxime paused, her tone softening. "I just can't fathom what Durmstrang was thinking, letting such a coward become headmaster." "Karkaroff may genuinely have an important commitment," McPhail offered after a thoughtful pause. He did mention escorting a student for professional Quidditch team tryouts. Do you actually believe that? Maxime scoffed. Even if the child is a Quidditch prodigy, is it worth the headmaster personally taking him to tryouts? Especially such a long journey. Since when did Durmstrang start taking Quidditch so seriously? I always thought they only used broomsticks for clearing snow. Perhaps things have changed, MacPhail suggested. So, we're just supposed to wait? Maxime said irritably. We had everything planned for next year. And now, who knows how long it'll be delayed? There's nothing we can do about it, MacPhail replied, shaking his head. Karkaroff represents Durmstrang, and without him, that matter has to be postponed for now. Humph, Maxime huffed, clearly displeased. She shot a glance at MacPhail, her irritation evident. Why are you just standing there? Aren't you supposed to be brewing the potion? I'm eager to see the results. Actually, I suddenly don't feel like it, MacPhail began, but before he could finish, his feet left the ground. Maxime had grabbed him by the collar, lifting him effortlessly as though he were a child, and carried him toward the back room of the hall. Wait, what are you doing? Put me down. Let go. I don't want to brew anymore. MacPhail protested, struggling helplessly, but despite their considerable size difference, he was soon dragged into the small, dimly lit room. Fleur looked on, utterly astonished, her view of the world shattered. In the eyes of all Beauxbatons students, Madame Maxime had always embodied elegance and poise. She had never imagined that the most perfect professor of etiquette would behave so unrefined. Don't be surprised, my dear, Nicholas said, finally setting aside the popcorn he'd been munching on, a smile playing on his lips. They're old friends, and it's natural for them to relax around each other. When you return to school, you'll see Madame Olymp's refined side once more. Oh, and do remember to keep this little incident to yourself. Fleur nodded stiffly, still processing what she'd seen. Would you like to go take a look? Nicholas invited with a grin. MacPhail rarely demonstrates his potion making, so this is a rare opportunity. Is that all right? Fleur asked hesitantly. Of course, it's perfectly fine. Nicholas led Kyle and Fleur toward the room, and just as they reached the door, they heard a loud clanging noise from inside. Kyle and Fleur exchanged a look before glancing at Nicholas Flamel. Oh, you needn't worry, Nicholas said calmly, as though accustomed to such commotions. It'll all be over in a moment. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 244, Does he have a grudge against Dumbledore? The next morning, Kyle rubbed his head and sat up in an antique four-poster bed, blinking groggily as he took in the unfamiliar room around him. After a moment, he remembered, he was in Paris, at Nicholas Flamel's house. Would you like some breakfast, my lord? A high-pitched voice called from the far side of the room. It was a house elf wearing a pair of little goggles. Tada. Kyle recalled. That was the house elf's name. Yes, honored guest. Tada is very honored you remember my name. Unlike the typically timid house elves in the Hogwarts kitchen, Tada seemed much more self-assured. Dressed in a neat, well-fitting outfit, Tada looked more like a proper butler from an old manor than a house elf. But, like the others, Tada was a bit over-enthusiastic. As soon as Kyle sat up, Tada rushed over with an array of toiletries and breakfast items, setting them all down with practiced efficiency. Steak, sausage, bread, French foie gras, a selection of French soups, the table was practically overflowing, enough to feed a small army. That's plenty. I can't eat all of this. Kyle quickly said, pushing a few dishes aside as he grabbed a warm towel from the nearby tray to wipe his face. By the way, what happened yesterday? And why am I sleeping here? His head still felt a bit foggy. He vaguely remembered being invited to Flamel's house, meeting Fleur and Madame Maxime from Beauxbatons, but the rest was a blur. He had no idea why he'd spent the night here. My noble guest, you drank some rather strong water yesterday and fell asleep, Tada explained. The master asked me to bring you here to rest. Strong water. Kyle repeated, frowning as faint memories resurfaced, though still blurry. Yes, this, Tata replied, pulling a bottle out from a nearby cabinet. I made sure to save it after everyone finished drinking yesterday. Kyle took the bottle, and his expression shifted as he inspected it. It was a bottle of old fire whiskey. His eyes widened as he checked the label's date, 1933. He had been drinking fire whiskey that was almost 60 years old. No wonder his head felt like it was spinning. He'd never experienced a headache like this since learning occlumency. But, as he now realized, occlumency wasn't much help against fire whiskey. Master said you might need this, Tata said, holding out a small vial filled with a sky blue potion. Kyle took it, uncorked it, and sniffed briefly before tilting his head back and downing the potion in one gulp. Almost instantly, a cool sensation spread through his body, clearing his foggy head. Then, the previous day's events started to come back to him. During dinner, someone had indeed offered him a glass of something with a wine-like flavor. And it wasn't just anyone, it was MacPhail, the wizard who had presented the Merlin's medal at Hogwarts. At the time, MacPhail had said it was mead, perfectly fine for young wizards to drink. Kyle hadn't thought twice and took a sip. And now? Kyle rubbed his temples, feeling his headache intensify. Who would have guessed that MacPhail, a wizard over 100 years old and a distinguished Order of Merlin, first-class recipient, would lie to a kid under 13 and get him to drink fire whiskey? And then there was that Baruffio's brain elixir MacPhail had started to brew, an unpleasant, slimy, bubbling concoction that looked like a strange shade of brown. Kyle had only ever seen it brewing in MacPhail's cauldron. Not even a dragon could stomach that stuff. For a moment, Kyle couldn't help but wonder if MacPhail held some grudge against Dumbledore. Maybe, unable to best him, he'd settled for causing a bit of mischief by roping Kyle into his bizarre antics. After breakfast, Kyle left his room and followed a gleaming, golden corridor that led to the grand hall from the previous day. When he entered, he found the hall completely transformed. The ceiling was now open to the sky, while the walls and floor shimmered in a deep, dark golden hue. The moment he stepped in, Kyle was captivated by an astonishing scene, an orchestra, filling every corner of the room, playing their instruments with intense focus. The music was rich, sweeping through the space like a live opera performance. Nicholas Flamel lay reclined on a beach chair, soaking up imaginary sunrays as he listened contentedly to the music. Spotting Kyle, he smiled and said, "Tata just carried away all the leftover food. I guessed you must have woken up by now." Kyle approached Nicholas, still entranced by the magnificent orchestra around him. "Mr. Flamel, what is this?" "Oh, you mean this?" Nicholas responded with a proud smile. "This is the most precious treasure in my long life." With that, Nicholas rose from his beach chair. The beautiful opera continued seamlessly, but in an instant, the orchestra vanished, and the hall returned to its original form. Kyle noticed faint golden symbols flashing briefly along the walls, similar to the intricate carvings on the pensieve in Dumbledore's office. "Mr. Flamel," Kyle began, still processing what he'd seen. "As we agreed, call me Nicholas." "Okay, Nicholas," Kyle corrected himself. "Are these your memories?" "Yes." Nicholas's gaze softened. "An unforgettable encounter from a century ago. I often feel drawn to relive it." "Amazing!" Kyle marveled. A life-sized pensieve, surely, only in Nicholas Flamel's house would one see such a marvel. "This is my proudest creation," Nicholas admitted, a fresh tune now filling the air. Kyle looked around at the vast, now empty hall, then leaned in and asked quietly, "Nicholas, do you think Mr. MacPhail has some personal grudge against Professor Dumbledore?" "As far as I know, no," Nicholas replied. "In fact, they get along rather well, and both share a strong interest in Quidditch. Before you arrived, he even promised Albus he'd look after you." "By tricking me into drinking fire whiskey?" Kyle asked skeptically. "That's a rather unique way to show care." Nicholas chuckled. "That has little to do with Albus. Ever since Dougald retired, he becomes something of a loose cannon. And it's not just you, he even pulled a few stunts on Fleur. But he seemed to forget that Olymp is here too. Oh, this might lift your spirits a bit. Nicholas clapped his hands, and suddenly, the painting in the hall transformed. The original music was replaced by pitiful wails and a loud, rhythmic thudding sound, unmistakably MacPhail's voice. Kyle recognized it instantly. He had heard the exact same scream yesterday from the potion room, and it had made quite an impression. Kyle whispered, "Could it be that Madame Maxime?" "Exactly." Nicholas winked, a mischievous smile on his face. "I doubt he'll be stepping outside anytime soon." Kyle chuckled, though he felt a twinge of sympathy. This had nothing to do with Dumbledore. It was one thing for MacPhail to prank him, but to involve Fleur, right under Madame Maxime's watchful eye. He'd certainly paid the price for that mistake. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 245, Nicholas Flamel's private library. After learning that everyone else had already left, Kyle was about to pack up and head back himself when Nicholas Flamel shook his head and said, "There's no need to hurry, Kyle. You can stay here for a while if you like. And I heard from Albus that you've taught yourself some alchemy and invented a rather interesting little gadget. It has something to do with Quidditch, doesn't it? May I take a look?" "Well, yes, though I'm not sure if it really qualifies as alchemy," Kyle replied, pulling a transparent snake bracelet from his moleskin pouch, the same type he had once sold to Malfoy for 100 galleons. Since then, he'd received a few more orders, though not many, only 5, as 100 galleons was no small sum. Even for Slytherins, few would spend so much on a toy. This bracelet was something he'd made in advance, ready to use as a way to attract new customers when the school term began. It was also the only item related to alchemy he currently had on him. Nicholas took the bracelet and raised his eyebrows, a hint of surprise showing on his face. To embed a charm into a solid object, yes, this is indeed alchemy. "I think you've read that book, Alchemy, Ancient Art and Science," he added. Kyle nodded. "I stumbled across it in the school library." "It's an excellent book on alchemy," Nicholas said thoughtfully. "Though some ideas in it differ from mainstream alchemical thought, it's very beneficial for beginners." Nicholas ran his fingers gently over the bracelet. "It's impressive you've developed such a solid foundation. I can only spot a few minor flaws. It seems you're quite interested in alchemy." Kyle nodded without hesitation. Yes. Of course, he had to show interest now. Admitting he was studying alchemy to research Horcruxes would hardly go over well. Kyle had no interest in pursuing his studies in Nurmengard. Besides, as the creator of the Philosopher's Stone, Nicholas Flamel's expertise in alchemy was beyond anyone's imagination. Even if he taught only a few tricks on a whim, it would be an invaluable treasure for Kyle. "Good, then come with me." Nicholas returned the bracelet to him and led Kyle to a circular room. There was little furniture here, just a few tables. The rest of the space was filled with books. An astonishing number of them. Rows upon rows of towering bookshelves extended as far as the eye could see, stacked neatly from the floor up. Nicholas gestured to the shelves. "There are many alchemy books here, as well as notes from my earlier years. If you're interested, feel free to look through them anytime." Kyle looked up at the vast array of books in all. "Are all of these about alchemy?" he asked incredulously. "Not at all, only a few." Nicholas pulled a worn copy of the Tales of Beetle the Bard from a nearby shelf. "If you want to read something else, you can find it here too, whatever you like. It's like having a library in your own home." Kyle muttered. "Not quite, just my personal collection." Nicholas placed the book back on the shelf. "I began gathering books in my early years and kept them here. At first, there were only a few shelves, but over time, they grew and grew, until it became like this." This was only from the early years. Kyle couldn't help but marvel. Even just the collection in front of him was already larger than the Hogwarts library. Nicholas, however, seemed eager to return to the opera. With a few parting words, he took a few small steps toward the door. Before leaving, he called for a house elf. Tata knows the location of every book here. If you're looking for something in particular, just ask it. The door closed behind him, leaving Kyle alone with Tata, the house elf, who stared back at him expectantly. A moment later, Kyle asked hesitantly, "You know where all these books are?" "Of course, my honored guest," Tata replied proudly. "As a qualified house elf, I must be able to locate whatever my master needs at any time. Though it may be difficult, Tata can manage it. Could you help me find 1,000 magical herbs and fungi?" Kyle asked, testing her claim. Pop! With a snap of her fingers, a thick book appeared on the nearby table. "I also need alchemy, ancient art and science." Pop! Another loud snap, and the book, typically kept in Hogwarts' restricted section, materialized on the table as well. Kyle picked it up and leafed through it briefly. The content was identical to the copy he had seen before. "What about Stir the Soul's Depths?" Kyle asked, narrowing his eyes thoughtfully. Pop! The familiar snapping sound echoed again, but this time, nothing appeared on the table. "Please forgive me, distinguished guest." Tata quickly bowed low, her long nose nearly brushing the floor. "You cannot see that book." "Can't see it?" Kyle frowned. "At all?" "It's on the 23rd floor, the 97th row on the left," Tata responded with precision, "but you cannot see it, so Tata cannot bring it to you." Kyle realized that this library, too, seemed to have a restricted section of its own. For a moment, he considered searching for Secrets of the Darkest Art, a book he'd been eager to find. But given Nicholas Flamel's close relationship with Dumbledore, he quickly dismissed the idea. He already knew the basics of creating a Horcrux from Voldemort, so there was no need to take that risk. "That's all right, Tata. I didn't really want to read that book anyway," Kyle said, refocusing. "Can you help me find Nicholas's notes?" "Just the basics." Tata straightened up. With a series of crackling sounds, like tiny firecrackers, the table was soon covered with a variety of well-preserved notebooks, parchments, and slates. Kyle eagerly flipped through them, only to discover that he couldn't understand any of it. The symbols were unfamiliar, completely indecipherable. It was as though Nicholas Flamel had leapt from the basics of alchemy straight to advanced research, skipping over everything in between, and those blank spaces were exactly what Kyle needed. "Do you have anything even earlier than this?" Kyle asked, frowning. Tata shook her head. Running out of options, Kyle shifted his approach. "Can you bring me the books Nicholas has written himself?" This time, Tata returned with something more accessible. The Principles of Alchemical Exchange. This was an alchemy textbook Nicholas Flamel had written long ago specifically for Beauxbatons. And it was exactly what Kyle needed. Now the fun in this clip is over. Which listeners haven't liked and commented yet? You can press like and comment to encourage the admin find the fun in the next clip. May the listeners be happy forever.